No worries.
Oh,
good. We're starting. Okay.
Well, it's just easier just to record now and then.
Okay. I'm just gonna exit for 1 second here.
Rebecca, can you see how many people are coming on? Because with the shared screen, I just see 3 little boxes.
Yeah,
So maybe
I'm letting them all in.
Okay, because we'll wait close to 8 o'clock.
Maybe
And then we'll start officially. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barbara Coachberg, and as co-chair of the Engaging in Education Committee, I welcome you here tonight for a surprising journey to meet some fascinating biblical figures. And please remember to register for next week for part 2. Before we begin, I would like to share some background information about our speaker, Dr. Stephen Kraft. Although the first detail given in his bio is his birth date, I will not share that with you, but I will tell you that he is a homegrown boy and all his academia was in Toronto at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine, at St. Michael's Internal Medicine, at U of T Faculty of Ophthalmology, and then his pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus fellowship training was in Iowa City and San Francisco. Stephen is currently on staff at the Hospital for Sick Children and the Toronto Western Hospital University Health Network in their ophthalmology departments. He is also presently a professor at the Temerity Faculty of Medicine, University of Toronto, since July 2001. He has been awarded the University of Toronto Department of Ophthalmology and Vision Sciences Resident Teaching Awards 12 times, from 1986 until 2022, as well as numerous American awards. He's very active in both Canadian and American professional colleges and associations. He has published research papers and contributed to chapters in medical books. Stephen has traveled the world teaching and leading workshops, and he has trained 176 international fellows who will continue to provide the delicate, intricate, and specialized treatment of eye disorders in children. And if that isn't enough, he is interested in and has pursued general and biblical archaeology, linguistics, excuse me, classical and modern music, live theater, sports such as squash, tennis, pickleball, swimming, hiking, and of course, he loves to travel. He also has a love for languages, fluent in English and Hebrew, with a working knowledge of French, Italian, and Russian. As a Renaissance man, I would say that it's no wonder that he loves to teach. In addition to his love of learning, he is generous to the point that he has donated his time here tonight to the Engaging in Education Fund to ensure that we will be able to continue to provide engaging programming. And so, Stephen, I will now ask you to answer for us. Did these people really exist? Part 1.
Well, thanks so much, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be back. I was hoping that after 3 years that we'd be able to gather again together, but for reasons that I think are very sound, we've decided, I know your group has decided that we would do this online. But let's hope that maybe future talks before too long, we can start thinking about getting together. I enjoy much more the in-person interactions with people, but this is the next best thing. And many of you out there in cyberspace have been at many of my talks in the past. It's nice to have you all back. and some new individuals as well. Welcome to our Beth David online series of Science Meets the Bible. So Barb posed a couple of questions, and I will get to those answers very soon, but I first have to declare that there's no financial or conflicts of interest to declare. And I should tell you that this also applies to some of the other talks that are on the YouTube Beth David website, that all the photos and maps are accessible on the internet with attributions to the authors and the owners if you want to look them up. And also, as I know is the custom, our Shamash, Michael Rubin, I will follow his lead and say that the land that the Beth David has is originally that of First Nations, and we acknowledge their history and their culture, and to thank them for allowing us to use their lands for these purposes. There is a series that I presented. I presented it in person 4 years and 5 years ago, and then again we did this online to keep us busy during COVID. And this is the series of 8 lectures that we've had in the past. And you're more than welcome to look at these at your leisure to access them, just those of you that would like to see these. You have to go to YouTube and put the search of Beth David B'nai Israel Beth Am, which is our synagogue. The first icon is the logo for the synagogue. And when you press that, you will see a whole bunch of videos. And there's over 200, Kanena Hora, there's over 200 of them right now. And you can go through them and try to find the 8 talks that I've given, but it's much easier if you go to the top and you'll see a ribbon with the word playlists. And if you click the playlists, you will see just 4 or 5 entities, and one of them is Stephen Kraft lectures, and that will contain all 8 lectures. Each one is about an hour, and enjoy. I hope you enjoy, and I'm more than happy at any time to get questions or comments about them. Among those 8, the first 4 were the scientific basis for the sights and sounds of certain narratives in the Bible: the flood of Noah and Garden of Eden, the creation story, the time of the patriarchs and matriarchs and Joseph, and finally the meaning, the meaning that I've derived for the story of the binding of Isaac. And these are the narratives in the early part of the Bible, and the other 3 are of other topics that may interest you. The discussions of the setting of these early timelines actually shows that science can verify that these items, these stories, these narratives actually dictate place. And the creation of the universe, which is held by most astronomers and astrophysicists, occurred about 13.8 billion years ago. And I showed in that talk that it's actually verified by science in the Bible as well, that the Bible is actually consistent with what's known in science. The dating of the Garden of Eden and the flood of Noah also comes from various archaeological, marine archaeology and land archaeology, and that's in those talks as well. What is going to be more relevant to this discussion today and next week is the timing of the matriarch-patriarch age and also the Exodus from Egypt, because they're going to interact with the narratives that I'm going to be talking about. And so I just want you to keep in mind these dates of the early 2nd millennium BCE and the mid 2nd millennium BCE. They will come in today and also next week's talks. As I've done with my previous talks, I have a list of references if you want to read more about the events and the timelines and the verification of the people that are in the Bible from these sources and also from these sources. And just to note that there is a website, and the discussion is updated as of just a month ago. So some of the discussion that we're going to have this week and next week is really pretty current. So I've tried to bring some of these narratives and discussions to very recent. And there is this online Wikipedia website which updates information as new personalities are verified in the Bible. And what we're going to present today is verified as of that time. The bulk of what I'm going to discuss is in a couple of articles by Professor Lawrence Mikitiuk, who is an emeritus professor at Purdue University in the US. He's one of the first two references that I gave you. And when we're discussing the verification of people in the Bible, there are certain criteria that biblical archaeologists will follow to verify the personalities that we're going to discuss. And there's some very rigid criteria. If we're discussing inscriptions, these inscriptions have to be authentic and not forgeries. And there's ways that archaeologists can actually look for various features of an artifact to see whether it's a forgery or not. The provenance, in other words, where was it discovered? It has to be known and confirmed. And the inscription itself, where it's dated to, and its location and the biblical reference have to be within 50 years of each other. That's kind of the criteria that's been used because they have to be kind of contemporary. The biblical reference and the verification have to be counter-checking each other within 50 years. If they are clay seals, which we call bullae, again, they have to be authentic. They have to know where the provenance was, and it has to be confirmed. And again, the Bible and the seal have to agree within 50 years. If it's a society or political entity that's attributed by the Bible, then the artifact must match that as well. And 3 marks on an item have to match 3 marks in the Bible. That's a fairly strict criteria. The name and the father. So if it's somebody, the son of somebody, those have to be counter-verified. If it's a king or a regent, vassal or a servant or a scribe, that has to be verified by time and location and by the person's father as well, and also by the location. So these criteria are what are used to verify the personalities in the Bible. So how many people are verified? From Lawrence Mikitiuk's articles and from his research, there are 53 confirmed and 10 tentative. Tentative meaning that maybe only 2 out of those 3 criteria will match. And they're waiting for a third, let's say, to be the 3 marks that will match the Bible and the archaeological history and context. There are 10 that are tentative. And what about the Wikipedia source, which is the other source? It's confirmed 41, and there are 29 that are tentative. But you can imagine that the 2 sources will have a lot of individuals in common. So if you take all of the individuals that are confirmed from both lists, it turns out that net combined, there's 57 that are confirmed, and there's 24 that are tentative, plus 3 recently added, which gives you 27. So at this point in time, as of 4 weeks ago, there are 57 confirmed personalities in the Tanakh, that's the entire Old Testament. There's 27 that are tentative and would need 1 more mark or piece of evidence to confirm the veracity. The timelines for these confirmed persons go from the early 11th century BCE, which is King David, through to the late 5th century BCE, which is King Darius Longimanus, who is very late in the Tanakh. And so those are the years that are encompassed by the confirmed persons. What about the tentative persons? What about people that have maybe 2 out of the 3 marks that are known? If you look at the tentative persons, we can actually stretch it back to the 13th century BCE and even to the mid-13th century BCE between the pharaoh Merenptah and King Balak ben Sippor. And if you look at the 4 fathers, Abraham and Jacob, there is some evidence, but again, not confirmed by 3 marks, of people by those names that date back to the early 2nd millennium. So these are tentative matching. Now, out of these categories, I have to give you where they're all located. So these people are 17 in number that are from the southern kingdom of Judah, and I'm including David in that group. The northern kingdom, which is Israel, there's 9 persons verified. Not all are kings, one governor and 1 priest. There's an Egyptian references. There are 5 pharaohs that are verified in the Bible. Moab has 1 king. Aram Damascus has 5 kings. Assyria has 7 persons who have been verified. Babylonia, 7 persons. And in Persia, 6. And if you add all these up, this will be the 57 confirmed persons in the Tanakh. Now, I have to make a very big disclaimer because it's going to be very obvious to you very shortly that this talk and all of these verified persons are all men. So before I get chats and people saying, well, what about the women in the Bible? The problem is we said that these have to be verified by 3 marks between the Bible and the history and the archaeology. Unfortunately, there are no women that we know of that have all 3 criteria that match. So I'll say now, I mean, we have some wonderful and very important women throughout the Bible. You go back to our 4 mothers, we go to Miriam, we go to Esther, we go to Deborah, to Hannah, and many, many others. Unfortunately, there is no verification that we have so far. But what I pledge to you is that after these 2 talks, if somewhere down the road we have some women that are going to be verified by these criteria, I'll call Barbara right away, and we'll schedule another evening, and I'll present to you all of the women with their verification. So let's hope, let's say, B'ezrat Hashem, that there will be some. But at this point, there are no women in the list because the evidence has not been discovered, and I say yet, but let's hope that maybe it will. So what I like to do in my talks is just to give you just some other things to feed your curiosity and interest, and it's much more fun to do this in person, but I'm going to put in, we're talking about personalities, and let me stop and just say one other thing. I don't know if Barbara had a kind of a means to an end here, but do you know what Parsha was just read last week on Shabbos? It was Parshat Shmot. The Parsha called, the first word Shmot means names. It was the names of all of Jacob's descendants who moved into Egypt. So here we are at the stage now of the biblical readings on our Shabbatot, and it's the Parsha of Shmot that precedes us going into this talk about names of people in the Bible. So I think that's very, very appropriate. So here's somebody not in the Bible, and if you recognize this gentleman, this is Vincent van Gogh, which is the correct Dutch pronunciation, Van Gogh, sometime in the 1880s. So what I've done is divided this into 2 parts. And what I was telling Barbara when I started putting this together and we were looking for a date to present this, it became very clear to me from all the research I was doing that there was no way that I could do justice to this in 1 hour. So it's actually divided into 2 parts. Tonight, we're going to deal with the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, and the shorter sections on Egypt and Moab. And part 2 next week will deal with some of the other political entities around Israel and Judah that will also have people verified, and finish with 4 tentative but strong identifications that I think you'll find very interesting and are literally hot off the press. So this is part 1. And here is the timeline of the kings. The first couple of sections will actually be most of the time that we'll spend tonight with the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah in their timelines. Preceding that, as you'll recall, there's actually the unified kingdoms. So the kingdom of the entire political entity that preceded the breakup into the 2 kingdoms was led by 3 of our ancestors, Saul, who reigned until about 1010 BCE, David, and then Solomon, following which we got the breakup into the northern kingdom of Israel, which lasted approximately 200 years. And then parallel to that was the southern kingdom of Judah, which lasted a little bit longer until the destruction of the first temple. So the first section will be dealing with the southern kingdom of Judah. And I'm including, you'll see that I've given David a little bit of notification here. And the timelines of their time that they reigned are actually derived from some of the archaeology that we will discuss. So we're going to start with the kingdom of Judah. And here are all the personalities in the Bible from that era, including King David, of course, that are verified by the criteria set up by Lawrence Mechtiak. Now, because there's many people, and I think it could end up being a very redundant and kind of tedious to go through all of them, we're going to just select a few from each of these groups, ones that I think will interest you the most. So I picked two kings, King David, King Hezekiah, or Chizkiyahu, and two scribes, because I thought it would be nice not to just have kings or pharaohs here, but also to have some of the more common and everyday personalities as well. So these are the four people that we will be just dealing with under the topic of verification of personalities in the kingdom of Judah. At the same time, there's actually an overlap here. Don't forget that I can give you the timelines verification for the biblical characters, but there's also parallel to that, the names of people from outside of Israel and Judah who are being described at the same time and are in the same chapters. So that's an overlap, for instance, that we see here, that the kingdom of Moab intersects what we were going to be discussing. And there's two kings that I will discuss as well, and we're going to kind of do these together. You'll see that I have a certain kind of nomenclature and a certain sort of way that I've set this out. So the people who are being verified will be in blue by and large, and the biblical references in blue, and locations and artifacts will be in red, as well as the discoverers, as you will see. So I'll be giving you the references. I'll also be showing you the Hebrew for the actual textual reference for these people, whether it's biblical characters or characters outside the Bible. And the first thing we're going to discuss is what's called the Mesha stele. This S-T-E-L-E is a monument with inscriptions. It's pronounced in different ways, but I'm going to call it stele, which is also called the Moabite stone. It's this artifact you see on the right, which is on exhibit in the Louvre in Paris, made of black basalt and in Canaanite script. It has 34 lines, and line 31 is of most interest in the context of David. It was discovered in 1868 by an Anglican missionary by the name of Frederick Klein. This artifact was shown to him by Bedouins who were living east of the Jordan River. It was discovered in Jordan, and the Bedouins broke it into several pieces. I don't know if it was intentional or by accident. And it was put together in 1873 by an archaeologist by the name of Charles Clermont-Ganneau. It was discovered in the kingdom of Moab, the ancient kingdom of Moab, which is listed here at this location, Dibon, which is the capital. Now, you can see this map also shows you the various kingdoms that were around the kingdom of Israel and Judah. So this is dating back to the 8th century, and you can see the various kingdoms, which we will be discussing. Next week, we'll do Aram Damascus and Assyria, and you will see that there are individuals that are referenced. Just a little magnification here on the east side of the Dead Sea is where this Mesha stele was discovered. This is the picture of Charles Clermont-Ganneau, lived in the 19th century BE, and he was able to put together 2/3 of the fragments from which all these translations were made. This stone, the stele inscription, describes the accomplishment of a king of Moab. So I said we're going to intersect a little bit, but I'm just digressing a little bit to a little discussion about this King Mesha, who is listed in the Bible in Kings. It's 2 Kings part 2. His name is Misha. He reigned in the 9th century BCE. And the kings at the time, the 2 kingdoms of Israel had already separated into the northern and southern kingdom during Jehoram and Jehoshaphat. Now, I'm just going to stop for a moment and tell you that there's archaeological evidence for Jehoshaphat. And it turns out that his first name was actually not just Jehoshaphat, but his first name was actually Jumping. So some of you will get that. His first name was Jumping, Jehoshaphat. Okay. The stele actually talks about a war that he led with the combined forces of Israel, Judah, and Edom. And that is actually accounted for in the Bible. So the name Mesha is actually in 2 Kings and is verified by this stele. Now, there's some very interesting references to other characters in the Bible. Lines 4 and 5 of the stele actually talk about King Omri of Israel. And we will discuss him when we come to the kings of Israel. And his reference to Omri is in 1 Kings. He had reigned early in the 9th century BCE. And his son was Achav, who reigned after him. And his Achav's came after, and his wife was Izebel, who was Jezebel. And there's a whole history there of her exploits. And I will not go into that at this point, but that's where the context is. Now, in the lines here at the top of this inscription, which is transliterated into the Hebrew here, you will see the name Omri specifically listed, accounting for his existence by a king outside of Israel. But the very interesting thing about the reference to David, so we're coming back now to David, to King David, and his reference is in the lower part around line 31. And in line 31, at this point here, there's actually inscriptions in the ancient script here, and this has been transliterated by an epigrapher who's very, very well known by the name of André Lemaire, who has translated several very important stelae and inscriptions and bullae over the years. He's still alive, he's semi-retired, but he's located at the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. And he has transliterated this series of characters to include the House of David, which is the first reference known to the existence of a lineage of a person by the name of David. And the letters are actually here. He's an epigrapher, and he has put forth that the letters on this line have the letters for Beit David, which is the House of David. However, not so fast. There's actually a contrary opinion by a group led by other well-known archaeologists, one by the name of Israel Finkelstein. And 3 years ago, they put in a paper that claimed that that line is actually not referring to David, that this is wrong. Who do they think is being referred to? Israel Finkelstein, who again is still living, is a professor emeritus at Tel Aviv University. And he and his group feel that the letters should be interpreted as BL something. And they feel by the context that this should be Balak. Now, Balak was also a king of Moab who lived several centuries earlier. And now we can just diverge to the discussion of the second king of Moab, who's listed in the Bible. And his story goes way back into the Torah in the 22nd to 24th chapters of Bamidbar, of Numbers. He's also accounted for in the Bible in the book of Judges and in the book of Joshua. He reigned in the 13th century before the Common Era, and his story is very famous. He hired a seer, a prophet by the name of Bilam ben Beor, to curse the Israelites. And as we know from the story, that attempt failed, but he did carry out a battle with an ally with the Midianites to try and lead the Israeli men astray and to try and capture them. And all of his exploits are listed in those 3 chapters. But he is listed in the book Bible, of course. This is an illustration that's located at St. George's Court in the United Kingdom. This is the famous biblical scene of Balak talking to Balaam and asking him to curse the camp of Israel, and he ends up praising them, that how good are your tents, Jacob, and so on, the words that we say, Matovu Mishkanotecha Yisrael, that is part of the liturgy of the Shacharit that we do every day. But King Balak is also mentioned outside of the Bible in a papyrus in the British Museum, which is actually referenced in what's called the Pulpit Commentary, which is a Christian Bible commentary over 30 volumes that took several years to compile by two reverends. And they reference this papyrus in the British Museum, which is claimed to have the actual name of Balak ben Zippor of Moab. So the contrary opinion is that these letters are actually referring to this Balak, and it could be Balak ben Zippor. The counter argument from Lemaire and others is that the events of King Balak that are described in the Torah, that are in the book of Numbers, took place 4 centuries before the dating of the Mesha stele. So that's a bit of a historical problem that's not been answered, but most epigraphers, such as Lemaire and others, feel that there's a fairly strong case that it actually is the house of David, and that's what most people hold. So we've now covered the kingdom of Moab, these 2 individuals, and we'll leave them now and leave the archaeological controversy to the experts. If you are in the camp of not sure whether David is actually listed in the Mesha stele, let me give you a much more strong verification from another inscription that was found 30 years ago by Avraham Biran, another very famous archaeologist, and it's called the Tel Dan inscription. And it was discovered in northern Israel. It has the same material as the Mesha stele, and it's also dated to the 9th century BCE. It was found in the destruction layer from the time of an Assyrian king, who was probably the most famous king from that state, who was Tiglath-Pileser III, and his nickname was Pul, and he's listed in the Bible in the prophets with both names, both Tiglath-Pileser, as you can see that I've put in Hebrew here, and also the name Pul. It was discovered here in the north. I've just shown you here where in the land of Israel that it was discovered, up in Dan. This is a picture of Avraham Biran. He lived to the ripe old age of 99, and it was written in Old Aramaic, this inscription. This is what it looks like. This is the ancient script that was copied from it, and from which the epigraphers have been able to make heads and tails of the text. This is what the text looks like in Hebrew, and you can see that in this line, number 9, there's the letters of the words Beit David. There's 2 translations, one in 1995 by the discoverer, Avraham Biran, and you can see that it has the name House of David, and also by André Lemaire, the same epigrapher who did the Mesha stele 3 years later, did his own translation, but agreed that those letters are consistent with the name House of David. I'll just point out that there's a couple of other names that we will discuss next week in the same Tel Dan inscriptions of the name Hadad. And I'll just mention briefly that in line 5, this name Hadad is either a storm god of the Aramean people who lived east of the Jordan River, or may actually refer to one of their kings whose name was Ben-Hadad, and he's referred to in the first book of Kings. And at that context, there was a war that King Baasha of Israel was warring against King Asa, and Ben-Hadad was asked to intervene. So we will be discussing Ben-Hadad more in detail in the future, the next lecture next week. But I'll just point out that it's almost unequivocal now that the name David is in this inscription. And so between the Mesha stele and this Tel Dan inscription, we do have the verification, and most archaeologists will agree, referring to King David. Another journey into history, not somebody in the Bible again, but in the Bible of Western music. This is John Wayne at age 23. The next person in the kingdom of Judah I wanted to discuss is King Hezekiah, or Chizkiyahu, who is well documented in the Bible in these various references. He followed his father Ahaz in the late 8th century BCE, and he was a good king. He was good. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, restored temple rituals and other rituals and places that were destroyed and idols that were allowed by previous kings. So he restored the temple practice and the worship of God through the Bible. And there's three sources for his existence. So we have three verifications that he existed. One, the Siloam Tunnel, which many of you are familiar with, is the tunnel that he had carved to bring water into the city of Jerusalem. The Sencheriv Prism, and a bulla that was found in the city of David. So let's start off with the Siloam Tunnel, which is mapped here for you, going from outside the city walls into the spring of Siloam. And it was actually the construction of this tunnel was referred to in Kings and also in book 2 of Chronicles. It was completed in 709 before the Common Era, prior to the siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrian king Sancheriv, who we will discuss very shortly. And there's an inscription in the tunnel where the two teams of workers met. This is a very famous location. If you go through that tunnel, you can actually see this is a prototype that was put up at the point where they met. And it was discovered in 1880. The original, which is here, is now housed in the Istanbul Museum. It was taken by the Ottomans to the museum in Istanbul, and that's where it's located. This is the script that has been used to make the translation, and this is what the translation describes. It describes the story of the tunnel and about the voices of the men on each team that were starting to hear each other, and they finally hewed through the stone and found each other, and the water now was able to flow continuously into the old city. Now, that was described as being built and commissioned by Chizkiyahu, but it doesn't tell you that he was actually verifies his name. But just outside of the tunnel, in an article that is just a month ago, Eli Shukrun and Gershon Gali actually found another inscription, which had been missed for many decades, that exists just at the entrance to the tunnel. And it actually confirms the name Chizkiyahu, the name Hezekiah, in the verses that are in this inscription. So you can see that it's not very well inscribed, but when they've used various kinds of radiography and other methods, they actually were able to decipher the letters in this inscription at the exit of the tunnel, which actually has the name Chizkiyahu. Here are the two protagonists, Gershon Galil and Eli Shukron, who made this discovery and translation that was just publicized a month ago. The Sancheriv Prism is the second verification, and it describes the exploits of this king of Assyria. We will talk about him a little more detail next week when we talk about the kingdom of Assyria and the personalities verified in the Bible. But this prism tells of his military campaign and how he captured 40 cities in Judah. But we have a famous story where he could not capture Jerusalem because of a plague that was brought outside the city walls. And so of all the cities that he attacked, it was Jerusalem that he could not capture on his first campaign. Now, this is one of three prisms. There are three versions of this particular monument. The one that I'm showing you here is the one in the British Museum, which is called the Taylor Prism. But there are other copies, one in London and one in Chicago. And they're written in Akkadian cuneiform. And the actual prism translated actually describes Sancheriv boasting that he kept Hezekiah shut up in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. That's the actual script in the translation. And this verifies from his prism here the name Hizkiyahu, and also the right time frame for the attack on Jerusalem as verified in the Bible. The final piece of evidence is a bullet inscription found in 2009 by a Hebrew University team who were excavating in the Ophel, which is not the city of David, but it's the section of excavation right beside the south wall of the Temple Mount. And they found 34 seal impressions in an undisturbed Iron Age layer. Now, we said that in order to verify these various artifacts, it had to be the provenance and the time, and the layering had to be verified and untouched. So in 1987, these seal impressions were found, but the one that you see here was found in 2009 in a building used by the Babylonians until they destroyed it in 586 BCE. And the team that led the discovery was Eilat Mazar, who unfortunately died at a young age, but she was a famous archaeologist who did a lot of excavations for 20 years in the city of David and in the Ophel. And prior to that, this area was excavated by another renowned archaeologist, Dame Kathleen Kenyon, who did her excavations in the 1960s, and she hails from Oxford in the UK. I'll just show you here where these places are located. So you can see on the top left, here's the Temple Mount, the southern wall, and the Ophel is here in this section just south of the Temple Mount here. Now, this is the area under more magnification. Here's the south wall of the temple, and these are the excavations. This is the area called the Ophel, which is different from this area. This area is the famous stepped stone structure, which is located in the city of David, which is south of that. So here's the city of David, south of the Ophel. I'm just going to mention this again in just a moment, but here is the two different sites that these teams have been excavating at. And right here is the area where they found all these clay impressions in the Ophel, which was excavated by Eilat Mazar. This is the word Ophel. This is the Hebrew in the Bible, and it's referenced in Nehemiah, Nehemiah, and in the second book of Chronicles. And it was built by King Yotam, who reigned in the middle of the 8th century BCE. And actually the quote here said that he built a gate to the temple above and the wall of the Ophel below, and it's referring to this section of the excavations. And they found many bullae, and the ones that are of most interest to us are the three that I'm showing here. This one here is one that says belonging to Isaiah the prophet. And I'm going to discuss this in detail next week. This is a gold medallion that was found in that same excavation. Gold medallions, by the way, are very rare. There were not a lot of people who were rich enough to own these or carry these around. So seeing gold medallion is really quite rare in these excavations with a menorah. You can see a Torah scroll. And this one on the right, though, is the one that is of interest to us right now because it has been translated to the following, saying, belonging to Hezekiah, the son of Achaz, king of Judah. And that verifies the existence of a king by that name in the right destruction layer and verified as original by the archaeologists. And so this is the third piece of evidence of the existence of this king. This means we're going on to another personality, but here again, not a biblical figure. Anybody recognize who this is? That is in 1870. I'm going to do just a couple of brief comments on people who are not kings, but are verified by archaeology. One is Maryahu ben Shaphan. This is the Hebrew in the Bible. He's verified from the second book of Kings and also the book of Jeremiah. He was active during the reign of King Jehoiakim, and his father was named Shaphan. He's Ben Shaphan, who is also a scribe. And he is a very famous scribe because there's a story of how a book of the law, thought to be the book of Deuteronomy, was found in some rubble by the high priest Hilkiah, which was brought to the king Yoshiyahu, and it also renewed the faith in the Bible and in the service of God after several kings who abolished that practice. So Gemariah, just like his father, was a scribe, and he was the one who transcribed the words of the prophet Jeremiah. So he's listed in the book of Jeremiah. And when Jeremiah was imprisoned, he actually relayed the words of the prophet to the common people. And his bulla was found in the excavations of the city of David, which, as I mentioned, it was just south of the Ophel. This is the clay disc that was found in the 1980s. It was found in the city of David by the archaeologist Yigal Shiloh. They date it by the script to the 7th to early 6th century BCE, which is exactly when he would have lived. And it's among those 53 bullae that were found in a quarter of the city of David called the Burnt House. This is Yigal Shiloh, again died unfortunately at a young age, former head of the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University. And here is the seal that he discovered, which is verifying the presence of this scribe. There's another scribe by the name of Baruch ben Nerayahu, also accounted for in the book of Jeremiah. And he was active in the early 6th century and witnessed the destruction of the first temple. And he was the one who passed on the warnings of the prophet Jeremiah when the prophet was hiding from King Jehoiakim. And his bulla appeared on the antiquities market, which would have sort of made his verification a little bit more tenuous. But there was an exact similar one found in the same location, which was verified by its site and by the archaeologists. And it was purchased by Nachman Avigad, another famous archaeologist. This is a picture of him during his days as an archaeologist. And he found this bulla, which was also matching the one that was found in the city of David, that specifically, when it's transliterated, said, belonging to Baruch, son of Nerayahu, the scribe. And so again, this verifies the presence of this gentleman in history. And what's also interesting, Avigad actually found that there was a bit of this edge of this bulla that was rubbed off. So it's got a beautiful border, but this was rubbed off and it has some fingerprints there. And it's thought, Nachman Avigad claims that this may very well be the fingerprints of this man. So not only do we have his name, but we may also have his fingerprint. Do we ever have to verify it? At least we could have the detectives use that. So another journey into history. Anybody want to guess who this gentleman is talking to his grandchildren?
Freud?
Sorry?
Freud?
No, Leo Tolstoy, 1909. So we've taken our journey through the kingdom of Judah. And before we go to the kingdom of Israel, I talked to Barbara and the group. If there's any questions in the chat or anything people would like to ask, maybe we can take a moment to just answer any questions at this point.
Stephen, there was a question in the chat from Anna. She wanted to know, what is the destruction layer?
Destruction layer, well, in any archaeological dig, they have layers by layers. It's like an onion skin that you have to peel away, going deeper and deeper into history. And if there's a layer that is not a construction layer, but is actually shows a lot of ash and residue, it's presumed that there was a destruction by a fire that occurred at that site at that time. And by dating the layers above and below, you can actually date when that destruction occurred. So this is very common in all archaeological digs that have multiple layers going back through the centuries. When there's an intervening layer that has ash, it could be from an earthquake, could be from a destruction by an army or so on. This is what we call a destruction layer. So one of those artifacts I showed earlier was discovered in the destruction layer, dating to, in that case, Tiglath-Pileser's invading of Israel. Okay, so let's go now to the Northern Kingdom of Israel. There are 10 individuals who are verified by archaeology and so on. And again, just being selective, we're just going to discuss 4 of these individuals. Again, ones that I thought would be of interest to you. Now, King Omri, we've already met once earlier on. His description of his life, very short in the Bible, was in the first book of Kings, reigned in the 9th century BCE. And he was crowned king by the Israelites in place of Zimri, who reigned for a grand total of 7 days. And King Omri was listed as one of the evildoers who did not follow God's wishes. And we found on line 4 of the Meshe Stele, which we showed you earlier at this stage here. You can see on lines 4 and 5, he is verified by this stele of the King Mesha from Moab. And so he is verified again by the Bible and also by a source outside of the Bible. Going on now to a king we haven't discussed. This is King Jeroboam II, his Hebrew name Yeravam, whose exploits are attested to in the 2nd book of Kings. He reigned in the early 8th century BCE after Joash, was also a king who did evil in the sight of God, and his seal was found on the antiquities markets, but it was authenticated. This is key. The actual seal was authenticated by Yuval Gorin, who's an archaeologist who's also quite well known. And this is also hot off the press because it was verified and publicized in an article that just came out very recently by Amanda Borshel-Dan, who's the deputy editor of the Times of Israel, who did the publicizing of this just a month ago. And this is the seal. It has the Hebrew Lishma or Lishema Eved Yeravam, to Shema, the servant of Jeroboam. And so by the verification by Yuval Gorin, it now verifies the existence of a king by that name, again, with the script suggesting the correct timing of his existence. Another king who is listed as being verified is Pekach or Pekachia. He was the son of Rimalyahu, in Hebrew Pekachia ben Rimalyahu, who reigned in the 2nd half of the 8th century BCE. Another king who wasn't very pleasing to Hashem and to God. He was assassinated by Hoshea in 732 BCE. And like one of our earlier personalities, he was mentioned in the annals of this king of Assyria by the name of Tiglath-Pileser or Pul. And he captured several cities in Israel during his campaign of 732 and 731. And his annals actually mention this name of this king as one that he had defeated in his campaign. And just to show you again where these different kingdoms existed, there's the kingdom of Israel, and Tiglath-Pileser came from the Assyrian Empire, which was northeast, and he would have to traverse the kingdom of Aram Damascus, which we will discuss next week. So here are where these various Moab, Israel, Assyria, and Aram Damascus. Another king from that era was Hoshea ben Elah, referenced again in the 2nd book of Kings, reigned again in the late 8th century BCE. Another king who didn't follow the ways of God. He's also mentioned not only by Tiglath-Pileser, this famous king from Assyria, but by his son as well, Sargon II, whose Hebrew name is Sargon, who reigned in the last few years, the last couple of decades of that century. And this annals described how these 2 kings quelled a revolt by the northern tribes of Israel, and that's when the exile occurred. If you look at this date, 722 BCE, is a seminal date in the history of Judaism, because that's the date at which the northern kingdoms were captured by Assyria, and the tribes, the 10 tribes, were exiled, and these are the so-called lost 10 tribes. And it was these 2 kings who were again, documented in the Bible and by their own annals at the same time. And the king that was reigning at that time was Hoshea, verified by the annals of these two kings. So I think what we'll do is just stop for a second again. We're going into another the final section for tonight. And I'll stop before I tell you what this is. Just thought if there's any other, I think the chat has now doubled to 2 comments. So I just wondered if there's another comment, Barbara or Helene or Rebecca, anybody?
There, so I'm monitoring the chat here now.
Oh, Heather, thanks.
Stephen, it's Heather. So what would DNA testing if prints work to confirm identity? And that was from Debbie.
Great question. The problem is we don't have the fingerprints of Baruch. So the detectives are going to reach a dead end, unfortunately. But it's just that it's been rubbed out, and there are some prints, but it's just prints that show the ridges of the finger under the, an extremely strong microscope. It shows that, but it doesn't. We can't verify if it was him or not, of course, because there is no DNA on it, so there's no way of actually knowing his lineage or any other information about him. There is one more question.
Yep. One more question. This photo is the entrance to King Tut's tomb, and that's from Stephen Rubin.
Well, it's very astute because it either means that he knew it or he's seen it, or he remembers my talks from 2 years ago because I showed it to you once before. But he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. That's the unbroken seal that Howard Carter broke when he was able to open the doors to King Tut's tomb in 1922. I should just mention that I was putting this talk together, and 1922, of course, is 1 century. We're 1 century beyond that. So 2022 was an anniversary of 2 major archaeological advances. One was the 1 century anniversary of Howard Carter's entering King Tut's tomb, 1922. It's also the 200-year anniversary of another major archaeological milestone. Does anybody know what that was? In 1822, a whole branch of archaeology emerged because of the exploits of a man by the name of Jean-Francois Champollion, who was a French engineer and historian, and he came up with a discovery that changed the entire course of Middle Eastern history. Champollion was the man who translated Egyptian hieroglyphics, we think for the first time, although that's debated. But 1822 was the anniversary of the translation of the script on the Rosetta Stone, which has the 3 scripts, 2 in hieroglyphic and 1 in ancient Greek, which allowed the translation of hieroglyphics. And that opened up the entire field of Egyptology for the first time. And so this last year, 2022, was a major anniversary for 2 major discoveries. So now let's finish this section with a tour of Egypt. And there are only pharaohs that are documented in the Bible and verified as far as their existence outside of the Bible. And again, just to be selective, I've selected 2 of these pharaohs. Shoshank I, otherwise known as Shishak, and Necho II, also known from his hieroglyphics as Necho II. We're going to start with Shishak because other than King David, Shishak is the earliest verified personality, dating back from the 10th century BCE. So we talked about the timelines. Other than David, Shishak is the earliest verifiable personality that we have in the Old Testament. And he's referred to by the name Shishak or also Shishak in the Bible. And he is referenced in the 1st book of Kings and also the 2nd book of Chronicles. He reigned during the time of Solomon. Solomon was Shlomo in the Bible. and during the time of his son Rehoboam, who was the first king of Judah. So after Shlomo's death, the two kingdoms separated. His son Rehoboam was Rehoboam the first, was the first king of Judah, and Rehoboam, the first son of Nevat, was the first king of the new kingdom of Israel, Yerovam ben Nevat. So in these two states, unfortunately, were continually warring against each other. Solomon actually tried to get rid of Jeroboam, who was trying to govern this new entity of Israel, but he escaped to Egypt to the safety of this Pharaoh Shishak. And that's what the first reference to Shishak actually describes. This is his temple, the Temple of Karnak, which is in Luxor, Egypt, has a detail on one of the portals called the Bupastadidi portal at the Temple of Amun, shows a relief here, which is said to be that of Shishak. And it lists here 150 cities that he conquered in Israel and Judah. Now, I didn't know that there were 150 cities in the country, but he boasted that he captured 150 cities and subjugated many of the people who are depicted here. This is on that same portal showing reams of people that he subjugated and captured and took as prisoners. The reason that I mention Shishak is not just that he's the earliest personality other than David who's accounted for, but we can actually use his exploits to date the times of the reigns of Solomon, David, and Solomon. Because in the Bible, in the references, it actually says that Shishak did battle against Rehoboam, who was the king of Judah, in his 5th year of his reign. Now, the 5th year of his reign corresponds to this campaign, which is dated, this campaign of Shishak, to 925 BCE, based on his inscriptions. So if he's in the 5th year of his reign, then it means that his reign began in 930 BCE, and he followed Solomon. So by going back, it means that Solomon, who is known from the Bible to reign for 40 years, must have reigned from 970 to 930, which is the year that Rehoboam would have assumed the throne. It then dates David back another 40 years. He reigned from 1010 to 970. And that then gives the reign of Saul as ending in 1010. He's thought to reign about 20 years, which would mean he reigned from 1030 to 1010. So this is a very important pharaoh. His exploits allow us to date some of the biblical eras. I should just say that Finkelstein, who we described a little bit earlier, that challenged Lemaire's reading of the House of David on the Mesha Stele, also doesn't agree with these dates and feels that they're too early. And that's a whole other archaeological discussion and debate that I'm going to leave. It's like the Talmud, it goes on and on, back and forth, but I'm going to leave that for now. This is a dating that most people accept, and it makes sense based on the history of the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak. Another pharaoh who's referenced in the Bible from the 2nd book of Kings is the pharaoh Necho, otherwise known as Nekau. His name is spelled 2 different ways, as you can see, Necho with a hey or with a vav. He reigned in the late 7th century BCE during the time of King Josiah or Yeshaya, and he attacked Judah, and Josiah came out to challenge him and lost his life and the battle at a place called Megiddo. And in the Greek translation, the name of the place where this occurred in the Septuagint translation was called Har Magedon, which is also in Christian Bibles called Armageddon. The Hebrew is Har Megiddo, and it's a very important place in Christian sources, because in the New Testament book of Revelations, it describes an apocalyptical battle to come between the forces of good and evil at the end of times at this place. So it's actually a place where 2 very important and famous biblical accounts of battles occurred. One of them was this one, the later one. There was an earlier one described in the Bible. But the pharaoh who was involved in this battle was the pharaoh Necho. This is a bronze statue of him, which is in the Museum of Penn State, of the University of Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh. And Necho actually is described as living at the time of the kings Yoshiyahu and Jehoahaz, and he extracted in his annals. It talks about how he extracted a large monetary penalty, and he actually replaced Jehoahaz with his son Jehoiakim. There's actually a prophecy in Jeremiah that during the fourth reign of this king Jehoiakim, this young king, that a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, a very famous king of Babylon, whom we're going to discuss next week, defeated this pharaoh Necho at a battle at a place called Carchemish, and that's referred to in the second book of Kings. Following that battle, Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem early in the reign of this Jehoiakim and his son Jehoiachin, and he captured the temple and the treasures, and that coincides with the capture of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Necho is actually, a reason that I thought would be interesting for you to know about him is because he was known for a lot of construction projects, especially in the capital. His capital in Egypt was Memphis. He was the first person to envision a Suez Canal. So if you think of the Suez Canal being a project that is existing in the 20th century, or even the 19th century, that's not true. 2,500 years earlier, there was a Suez Canal that was built by this pharaoh. He commissioned 12,000 workers in the early 6th century BCE, and his project is actually mentioned in an inscription by a king of Assyria by the name of King Ashurbanipal, and in his annals, the name of Necho II is actually listed. This King Ashurbanipal we're not going to discuss, but he reigned in the mid 7th century BCE, and he is referred to in the book of Ezra. My final historical figure, again, not a biblical figure, but somebody from the 19th century, is Hans Christian Andersen, a picture from the 1860s. So we have gone through part one. We've gone through various personalities, kings and others in Judah and Israel. We've gone through Egypt and Moab. And next week, I hope you'll join us for a discussion and a tour through 4 other kingdoms whose personalities are referred to in the Bible and also verified, and 4 tentative persons that I think you'll find quite interesting just to whet your appetite. Now, I just want to thank, at this point, the crew here at Beth David, Barbara and Heather and Helene and Rebecca for all your help, because on your behalf, I want to thank them. I'll thank them next week, because without their help, this type of presentation could never occur. So here is the map of some of these kingdoms from very early in the historical periods that we have discussed. Some of these will come up next week. And as far as part one goes, this is the end. And I'll take some questions now, and you guys can unmute, I guess, if anybody wants to ask any questions. I see there's a 4th question in the chat, so I guess it's something new that's come up since the last questions. Thanks.
It was just a response to the Rosetta Stone.
A response to, oh yes, so that
Yeah.
somebody guessed what it was. Okay.
Somebody guessed what it was. Yes.
Very good. Okay, that's right. Yeah, so 2022 was a very monumental year in terms of anniversaries. I don't know what happened in 1722, but maybe somebody can find something archaeological to go back then, or maybe even the year 22.
Stephen, would you be okay of unsharing your screen so then we can get
Oh, I can stop sharing. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Good. Okay.
We can just see if anybody has any questions. You can use the raise your hand as well.
Someone was asking, is there any evidence of Moses?
Not, it's not verified by any archaeological thing, but there are various books, and this is a whole discussion. I can do a whole talk just on the references to Moses, but his name is part of 2 or 3 pharaohs. There's Thutmoses the first, Thutmoses the second, Thutmoses the third, and there is conjecture from various biblical scholars and experts that that name may have been associated with one of these pharaohs, and they are documented in, of course, archaeological context. But as far as the name Moses alone, I'm not aware of. There are some peripheral references, but nothing that I think any archaeologist would consider to be verified or matching the criteria that Professor Mektiak can put in his criteria.
Lots of accolades in the chat. Stephen, go ahead and read yourself.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much. I hope the next one will be just as interesting. But
okay, can I just can I just say kol hakavod to you? It was unbelievable, very interesting, and I can't wait for the second part.
Ruchama, you're one of my most wonderful friends on this journey, and I learn as much from you as I could ever impart to you. I mean, you teach me so much on our email chats, so I enjoy. I open your chats first.
Okay, I enjoyed every minute. Really, it was beautiful, beautiful.
So we have one more question here from Debbie. Is there any evidence of Noah's Ark?
Of Noah's Ark? Boy, you're really now she's going way back. Well, I can give my talk on the timing of Noah's Ark. If you want to, I'll give you the hour version in 55 minutes. There isn't any verification of Noah. And Noah's Ark, there have been, I have read some really fascinating anecdotes in non-classic literature of pilots who have seen pieces of wood sticking out from Mount Ararat, which does exist in Armenia.
Yeah.
And there's other evidence. People have said that they've seen that there's some discoverer, some explorer who went up Mount Ararat and found some petrified wood that apparently was dated to, around 3000 BCE. What I will say is we have to be very careful of what we're interpreting. That has not been verified by classic archaeology. The timing of Noah's Ark is not 3000 BCE, as far as I'm aware. The talk that I gave, and is on the Beth David website, is that it's actually 3,000 years earlier than that. And the Bible does not say that the ark landed on Mount Ararat. That's a misinterpretation of the actual Hebrew. If you go back to the Hebrew, it says that it landed on Hare Ararat. It's a plural, the mountains or the mountain range of Ararat. Nobody knows exactly where in that range it occurred.
So actually, I was always wondering if the ark was in Mount Ararat. So where was the flood?
The flood occurred in the I don't know.
What area was the flood if the ark was there at on Mount Ararat?
We think it occurred, from evidence that I showed in that talk, it probably occurred in the area of northern Turkey, in the area that's now the Black Sea.
Mm.
And the verification of that and the timing is all in the talk on the timing of the garden. It also, we discussed the Garden of Eden, which did exist, not the garden necessarily, but the land of Eden did exist. And there's various archaeological evidence for that. So I'll leave that for people to watch that presentation in our website. It's called The Timing of Noah and the Garden of Eden, Where and When. And all of that is verified and all the references are on that. But there is no confirmed or accepted archaeological verification of an ark, and not necessarily on Mount Ararat, which is in Armenia.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for all your great questions, everyone, tonight. On behalf of Barbara and myself and the Engaging in Education Committee, Stephen, I'd like to thank you so much for your insightful seminar tonight. In the personalities in the Bible, did they really exist? I totally understand now why you were honored so many times for teaching awards, because your presentation style, your love and devotion to the subject matter really shines through. And it really helps us to learn the information so much easier. And you also made it fun by interacting with us and answering our questions. I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Please, again, remember to register online so you can get sent the Zoom link. And if you have any questions that come up during the week, save them for next week, because I'm sure Stephen will be happy to answer them. And on that note, have a wonderful rest of the week and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Take care,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Stay well, and thank you so much, Stephen.
My pleasure. It's a labor of love, as always.
We can tell.
can tell.
Take care, everybody. Thank you so
Good
much for
night.
joining us. Okay.